And now, it's a summoning ritual. Because why else would you own every single one of the Nintendo DSes? I mean, why? It's not like each and every one of them has their own stupid fucking benefits to playing DS games on them. Well, maybe not this one. This right here is the original Nintendo DS, released in 2004. My God. How does every single one of these feel a million times more fragile than like an original Game Boy or any of the Game Boys for that matter? You know, pieces of hardware that are significantly older. The original Nintendo DS has aged miserably. All right, I just want you to listen to opening one of these things up. I gotta be honest, every time I open the hinge on this thing and then you just hear it like set into place here, it feels like it's about to snap off. And you know, to be honest, like I've been a little rough with my systems before, but that's almost always like just like a comedic joke I do like in my videos, like if it makes sense to like whatever destroy a system, you know, I'll do it. And pretty much all the time, like it's when the system's already broken, like that's when I'll break something on camera. There was a time where I was just using an original Nintendo DS on camera, and then I think I opened it up in a weird way, and yeah, it just the whole top just ripped off. So you know what that means. It was a sacrificial lamb. Yeah, I used it for just a little bit where I was like, yeah, the DS is already broken. Time to break it more. Because to be perfectly honest, to me, that's about as worthwhile as the original DS is these days. The aesthetics are a little strange on this one. I don't think it necessarily looks that great, but there is something about it that just seems kind of like futuristic and kind of neat. I gotta stop repeating myself with the same old garbage here, but you know, I will say for like the billionth time, you know, me reminiscing about my you know, my stupid outlook on life as a child. I thought it was cool that this had a power button. All the Game Boys just had power switches, you know, the button made this feel like it was like a home console to go. So we turn this on and yeah, I can barely fucking see the screen. This thing has some of the worst screens I've ever seen on like a Nintendo handheld after the Game Boy Advance SP. I'm telling you right now, where I'm sitting, I can barely see what's on the screen right now. Every single one of these things that I've come across seems very, very well used. I mean, just looking at the bottom screen right here, like, yep, this has been heavily just fucking weird design choice right here. The stylus for the original DS was right here. You pretty much had to like flick it up with like your finger from the back. That was strange. It uses the original Game Boy Advance SP charger. So, you know, if you have one of those laying around, like that'll work on the original DS, which, you know, hey, that's nice. And of course, you have Game Boy Advance support here. And, you know, if we just plug one of these in, it fits flush with the console, which is a nice little, like, hey, it's at least good that, like, hey, you know, it's not sticking out like some sort of tumor. That would be horrible if a Nintendo DS did that with its Game Boy Advance cartridges. God awful. At the time, it was really amazing to have a handheld system with, like, a full-blown user interface here. I mean, you turn it on, and it has a full-blown menu screen. The thing is with the original DS systems is that you can't do anything on this menu interface without having to shut down the system after you like do anything. You can probably barely see this screen, but yeah, we're in the settings menu, and then when we're done, we hit B, and then it's like, yeah, the DS is gonna shut down now. And now it's dead. And like I said, the design itself is kind of like, it is kind of charming. Like, it feels very futuristic, but it's also, yeah, it's also kind of ugly. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even know the system was a thing when this was the model that launched. The DS from 2004 to 2006 doesn't even feel like it exists to me. It wasn't until after the Nintendo DS Lite release that I realized this handheld was even out. That just overtook everything to me when it came to what I considered to be the Nintendo DS. This thing was this weird little, like, I don't even know, it's just kind of fucking gross. I will say this model is decently comfortable. I do like the feeling of the buttons. They all feel pretty substantial. They have a bit of a click to them, but they aren't like too clicky. I do like how the shoulder buttons are pretty nice and big. This honestly kind of feels more in line with like a traditional home console video game controller than it does with like the Nintendo handhelds we were used to at the time, with specifically like the Game Boy Advance SP. At least when it comes to just overall bulkiness in the hand. Because as it is, this gives gives you something to hold on to. The buttons themselves feel very much in line with something like a Game Boy Advance SP. Like, these buttons feel pretty much identical to what you get on that little handheld. But I gotta be honest, even with the decent quality buttons, this is damn near intolerable. This is like one of the worst first versions of a handheld Nintendo's ever made. And this is coming from the same company that made the original Game Boy puke-ass green. I'm sorry, I cannot play on one of these days. The screen is just horrible. And I just feel like this thing is going to literally fall apart at any moment. It's just chunky. Look at this thing. Definitely a novel moment in the DS's history. It is the first after all, but man, I just can't do it with this original one anymore. The feel of it's all okay, it's just these damn screens. But that brings us to the Nintendo DS Lite. Probably like one of the most substantial redesigns Nintendo's ever done of any of their consoles. And like I said about the original DS being one of Nintendo's worst first iterations of their handheld, which that's saying something because, you know, like the fucking Game Boy. The DS Lite being one of their most substantial revisions is also pretty big to say because they've made some pretty damn good revisions throughout the years. I mean, like I already said, the original Game Boy Advance SP. I mean, like, yeah, this changed everything. And so did the DS Lite. The word light here could refer to a bunch of different things. The fact that it is lighter, sleeker, slimmer, all of that jazz. But also, the screens are actually light. You can actually see a goddamn thing on them. This was my jumping off point with the Nintendo DS. I got this in 2007, you know, this exact color, this exact model, a white Nintendo DS Lite. And my God, this thing rocks. Now, of course, looking at it these days, the screen is 100% better than the original DS. It's still, like, not as good. I think I'm definitely spoiled with what came afterwards with the Nintendo DSi. I remember in the moment, you know, it was kind of hard to, like, see a real big difference between, like, the DS Lite and DSi when it came to, like, oh, the quality of, like, the screens and all that stuff. Looking at it now, like, yeah, the DSi has, like, the best screens. But this is a substantial improvement from the original DS. We have multiple brightness settings here, so just like this is the brightest setting, and you know, hey, that it's something. Wow, this is like 10% of what my phone can do right now, but like still. The design has been completely rethought out to just be like this incredibly sleek, sexy little design. Like, oh my God, it looks delicious. And it really fits in with what Nintendo was trying to do in that year, 2006. You know, later that year, they launched the Nintendo Wii, which had like this exact same vibe. So it's pretty crazy that they were able to take, you know, this goddamn thing and turn it into something like this so effortlessly, or at least it made it seem like it was effortless. Man, that's something. The DS's whole vibe changed in 2006 onward. The original DS had a bit of a stick it to the man type energy. Like its whole tagline was touching is good, and I'm like, whoa. But the DS Lite was meant to kind of be a little more like, hey, DS is for everybody. Look at all this. It's all about just clean, sleek, family-friendly fun. Not just family-friendly, just, hey, this is for everybody. But you know what the best improvement was? Look where they put the stylus. Right handies unite! I think it definitely would have been cool if at some point they, you know, poured one out for a lefty out there and they put the stylus on like the left side of the system. I don't think Nintendo's ever done that, but yeah, I will definitely say it's at least much nicer to just have, you know, the stylus right here where you can just flick it out whenever you want, rather than wherever the hell they just had space for a stylus, which happened to be right here on the original DS. We have a brand new charger. The Nintendo DS Lite charger is exclusive to this handheld right here, so that kind of sucks. Spoiler for the other DSs, this was the only handheld that ever used this particular charger. If you have a DS Lite, you need a DS Lite charger. The DSi chargers, at the very least, like work across DSi and DSi XL. And then the entire 3DS line of systems use that exact same DSi charger. So, hey, that's something. The original DS, hey, that uses the GBASP charger. The DS Lite, it's a special little guy. Hey, at least the buttons are kind of cool. These are so damn squishy. This has always been like a hard topic to describe, you know, soft buttons versus clicky buttons. The original DS definitely has clickier buttons. where it's a little more of like a definitive click. The DS Lite has far softer buttons. They're a lot quieter when they hit down, and they also just feel soft overall. I guess the word I describe it with is like mushy, but you know, that kind of makes it sound like they feel bad, and they don't feel bad. People definitely have their preferences when it comes to clicky buttons or mushy buttons. If you have a Nintendo Switch, I would say, you know, the Joy-Con buttons are clicky. Something like the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, on the other hand, you know, those buttons are a lot bigger, and they're definitely a little softer, you know, but they're not as soft as something like a DS Lite. These things feel like a goddamn pillow. And hey, some people like that, some people hate it, but hey, regardless of what side of the fence you sit on, there is one thing we can all agree with. This is fucking putrid. Yes, we still have the Game Boy Advance slot, but because, you know, they slimmed the entire DS handheld down quite a bit, they stick out. Remember, the DS Lite came with this little plastic bit right here. You can tell, you know, they probably didn't really want to keep in the Game Boy Advance support when it came to the aesthetics of the DS Lite, because, you know, they wanted it all to be flush at the bottom here. Because honestly, it kind of feels like the Game Boy Advance support in the original DS was put in there just to be, like, super safe, because Nintendo at this point had only really ever done, like, Game Boy handheld, you know, nothing really outside of the Game Boy line. So now you're finally doing something completely different, and it's just like, oh yeah, but you know, you can do Game Boy games if you want to. By the Nintendo DS Lite, I think it was pretty obvious that like Game Boy Advance support wasn't like as much needed as it was before with the original DS. Like around the time the original DS released in 2004, the Game Boy Advance was still going strong. Nintendo was still releasing games for it. But by the release of the DS Lite, GBA was definitely starting to hit the sunset. And I think they were definitely a little more concerned with making this look like a sleek little iPod wannabe than being like, oh yeah, it can play all your Game Boy Advance games as well. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because I'll take the Game Boy Advance support, and for it to look a little dumb like this, then not have it at all. I take it back!
The Nintendo DSi launched in Japan in 2008 and outside of Japan in early 2009. I remember picking mine up in April of 2009 at GameStop, trading in my Nintendo DS Lite. I was so damn excited for this thing. Of course, looking back in retrospect, I kind of think like, why would I waste so much money on, you know, just a revision of a console I already owned? And it's because this was far more than that. At this point, we're like halfway through the DS's lifespan, and, you know, it feels like a completely different system at this point. 2004 era Nintendo DS is a lot different from 2008 era Nintendo DS, much like how 2004 era Nintendo was different from 2008 era Nintendo. I mean, the DS launched in the middle of the GameCube's life, in the middle of the GBA's life, and now we're in a point where it's like, yeah, it's the DS and the Wii. Like, it's from a different generation of Nintendo, practically. And it damn well ran like it, too. You know, like I said, you know, just messing around with the user interface of the DS, the fact that it had to turn off the entire system to do anything was ridiculous. Hell, you couldn't swap out game cards while the system was on. You had to turn off the system, turn it back on. It was ridiculous. And the Nintendo DSi felt like it was bringing the DS into maybe 2005, introduced a lot of stuff here that really made the DS kind of feel a lot more modern, you know, with stuff like, let's say, the iPod Touch. You also had, you know, the PSP from 2005, which was doing a lot of this stuff already. This all helped the DS kind of stay afloat in this era because, like I said, things were starting to feel incredibly dated. We had a lot of brand new inclusions here, a lot of big, heavy-hitting stuff. The most notable one, at least in the marketing, was the cameras. So you had one camera on the back of the unit and one camera on the front. This was a little bit before stuff like, let's say, the iPhone 4, which, you know, definitely did kind of popularize front-facing cameras. It didn't introduce them, but, you know, it didn't really popularize them. And, yeah, the DSi had one on the front here, which made it a lot easier to take pictures of yourself and also to mess around with the camera in certain fun, you know, games and apps. They also actually took advantage of the microphone here with a little sound application, which was really damn cool. You could also import certain audio files to use this as kind of like a bit of a music player here with the brand new SD card slot, which was a bit of a cool addition. What the fuck? Yeah, we got rid of the Game Boy Advance slot, and replace it with nothing. So why did Nintendo do this? Well, at this point, I don't really think it was that necessary for them to keep supporting the Game Boy Advance through the DS. The DS at this point already had like a vast enough supply of software for itself, where I don't really think, you know, the fact that the DS played GBAs was a huge selling point anymore. And, you know, including this slot definitely takes some resources away from other areas of the DSi. Also, you know, it costs some money, and they're probably like, why are we spending money on something that doesn't matter really much at all at this point? And it's also not like Nintendo just flat out stopped selling the Nintendo DS Lite when the DSi was introduced. So, you know, I mean, hey, if you want a Game Boy Advance slot, pick up a DS Lite. If you don't care about the GBA anymore, here you go. We have the perfect handheld for you. Golly gee, I just really want a handheld that doesn't play GBA games. So, perfect! But see, as a kid, the camera systems were the biggest selling point of the Nintendo DSi. I, of course, liked making stupid f***ing videos as a kid. So, you know, just the idea of being able to make little fun photos on the go and be able to mess around with them with the touchscreen and all of that stuff, it was just too perfect for me. It was literally like, oh my god, this is amazing. I want this so badly. I was definitely willing to give up the GBA slot for something like this. But, you know, what I think was actually like the most notable addition here was the Nintendo DSi shop. Allowing the DS to download exclusive software was a huge game changer, and it just shows how much of an evolution the DSi was compared to, you know, the DS Lite, and especially the original DS. This thing would fucking explode if you asked it to download a DSiWare game, and then just 2 revisions later, we got the DSi, where you can download DSiWare games. Now, back in the day, this was incredibly cool, but ever since, you know, I've kind of taken a look back at most of the major pieces of software that were released via the DSi shop channel, DSiWare games are pretty damn mediocre. I'm gonna be completely honest here. You, of course, have some heavy hitters like Shantae Risky's Revenge. You know, that's kind of a revival of a classic Game Boy Color game, Shantae, and it really kickstarted the Shantae series to become, you know, far greater than just, oh, an obscure little Game Boy Color game. Like, no, Risky's Revenge really kickstarted that series and brought it into the new generation. And, of course, my beloved Flipnote Studio on the DSi. It was a free application, and you could make your own little tiny animations. It was so damn cool. And then you could go online and view all these other people's Flipnote animations, and I remember seeing like all these crazy stick figure animation. Oh my god, it was so damn cool. But when I take a look at the vast majority of DSiWare stuff, a lot of it was kind of just like re-releases of like pre-existing DS software. It just cut down a lot. Nintendo took like Clubhouse games on the DS and just cut it up into like 5 different games and re-released it via DSiWare. They took Planet Puzzle League on DS and just kind of like just shrunk that down, removed a bunch of content, and released it for like a lower price point on DSiWare. Now, in the moment, I mean, like, I guess that's okay because, like, hey, you know, like, if you just want like a little quick game to play and you really like these games but you don't want to bring the cartridge with you, you know, for maybe like $5 to $8 or so, you can download a smaller version of them and you can just always have it available on your system. Definitely makes sense in that moment. But when I took a look back at DSiWare in like 2021, you know, that's when I made the DSiWare episode of Scott the Woz. Yeah, it just didn't really hit the same for me. I was kind of like, this is kind of pointless. I also thought it was a giant missed opportunity that they didn't have like a virtual console service on the DSi shop. You know, I felt like it would have been the perfect opportunity to just re-release Game Boy Advance games since you got rid of the damn slot, or at the very least, old school Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. But no, we had to wait until the 3DS to get a virtual console on a handheld. And even then, Nintendo, it was like pulling teeth with them to get Game Boy Advance games on there. Like, they didn't even release Game Boy Advance games on the 3DS to the public. They gave them away to people who bought the system early on in its life before they did a price drop, just as like a, sorry buddy, we fucked up. here's some Game Boy Advance games, and then they never did it again, so I'm like, whatever. The DSi definitely feels the sleekest out of all of the DS units thus far. The buttons go back to a bit of a clickier style compared to the DS Lite, but overall, in terms of its style, it is pretty comparable to the DS Lite. It kind of feels like it's a bit just more refined, you know? They made it a little boxier compared to kind of a smoother, a little more rounded edges, you know? Here with the DSi, we have like a full-blown matte finish. It's not really glossy at all, and the screens are significantly brighter and better than ever before. This user interface feels like it takes a lot of cues from the Wii menu, which is definitely a good thing. It feels incredibly fast, incredibly functional. You know, it's just such a huge upgrade from the original DS and DS Lite's user interface in nearly every single way. And like I said, you can swap out the games while the system's already on. We're in the fucking future now! One thing that I really like about the DSi is that it kind of plays into like a key element of like what made the DS so much fun as a kid. You know, I loved PictoChat back in the day. You know, and I would mess around with PictoChat. I wouldn't even really use it for like what it was meant to be used for. This is meant as like a little like local chat room kind of thing. But I would just kind of like doodle in it when I was bored. And I kind of feel like they took a lot of that energy and put that into the Nintendo DSi camera and sound apps, because I spend so much time in these things just dicking around. The camera has a lot of stuff going on here. I also love that, you know, you jump in it pretty damn quickly. The whole user interface kind of reminds me of the photo channel from the Wii. It all just works, which is all you can really ask for just a dumb little camera app designed for kids to just mess around with. The fact that we can just go in here and just have fun just messing around with things, having a good time, you know? It's like, I don't know, like there's something special about this kind of stuff. I feel like nowadays, you don't see a lot of stuff like this included with game consoles, and that's kind of a shame. You know, I understand that, you know, like, you know, if people really want to do this stuff, they already have smartphones. Why pump all of this energy into making apps for your game console that do this thing that, you know, like the kids already have smartphones that do stuff just like this? But I feel like that's a bit of a pessimistic attitude to have. Pump all this kind of junk in my PS5. I love this kind of bullshit. However, Nintendo wasn't satisfied with just the Nintendo DSi as is. They needed something bigger. My lord, I'm terrified. The Nintendo DSi XL. This is fundamentally a Nintendo DSi, but bigger. At the time, I didn't really understand the purpose of this, and the marketing was definitely aimed almost to, like, older people. Like, this was almost seen as like one of those like big ass jumbo remote controls or calculators that old people use, you know, because they can't see as well. So, oh, here's a Nintendo DSi for you. You know, just the fact that they also include 3 titles with this: Brain Age games and Photo Clock, and it doesn't really seem like this is made for 1, the hardcore gamer, or 2, anybody other than grandpa. I mean, the DS family of systems 100% kind of appealed to everybody, you know? Like, my mom liked playing DS games, my dad would play some here and there. So I think this was a bit of an experiment to see, like, okay, like, can we make a DSi that's a little more aimed towards, you know, an older crowd? And what this kind of turned into in the Nintendo 3DS family of systems, when we got the 3DS XL, that wasn't really aimed towards like old people in a sense. I think that was more so aimed towards like, this is for the hardcore 3DS user. Because I think what happened with this is that a lot of people actually tried out the DSi XL and they were like, well, damn, this is like so much better than the normal DSi. Like, just if you're an older person with just bigger hands, like, this is just so much more substantial and comfortable to hold. And watch this, even though I've like opened these Nintendo handheld XL systems like countless times at this point, they still kind of catch me off guard with how jumbo the screens look when I open this up. Jesus. Everything about this is fundamentally the same as the normal DSi, except for a few key differences. They have kind of a glossy finish on the outside of this right here. Then, you know, they have like a black bottom here. But fundamentally, like, yeah, this is pretty much the same as the normal DSi when it comes to the operating system within, the quality of the cameras. They're still not great. The DSi XL came with like a fountain pen. This is kind of like an off-brand one that came with this one. You see, I bought this thing brand new on eBay, and then I opened it up and I was like, well, goddamn, this isn't brand new. I could tell by, this is the thing that came with it. And also, you got like all this little like thumb grease on the D-pad here. Can you see that? So I'm just like, well, damn, this isn't brand new. I just wanted this midnight blue DSi XL, brand new out of the package. But instead, look at me. I look like a damn bum. Unfortunately, this fountain pen stylus like doesn't fit anywhere. It's kind of just like an extra little accessory you can have just kind of hanging around, I guess. Comes included with like a normal size stylus right there. Hey, you know, I will admit, you know, the fountain pen stylus is comfortable to hold. But I think the major star of the show here are the XL sized screens. And it's not just for like games that you're using the touchscreen with, just playing like normal Nintendo DS games on these screens. The fact that they're so big, they're so bright, this kind of feels like this is the definitive original DS model to play DS games on. And here's the thing, I would normally say something like, well, just buy a 3DS at that point, because it's just like the 3DS plays all of your DS games and 3DS games, so it's just like all of the DSs are just kind of like obsolete, right? And like I would say still like the best systems to play original DS games on are in fact, you know, the original DS systems. They just look so much crisper and nicer on like at least like the DSi screens here. 3DS, you can 100% play DS games on them, but the resolution is kind of stretched. Like the 3DS screens are a higher resolution, so playing DS games on them, they kind of come across a little blurry. It's nothing that bad. It's just they look a lot more crisp on an original DSi or DSi XL. You can like hold start and select while booting up a DS game on 3DS, and it'll play in the original resolution, but it's literally like they're the size of a goddamn Cheez-It on screen, man. I would say like a new 3DS XL is the definitive like all-in-one system, you know, like, hey, you can play DS games on that, and you know, they work perfectly fine on the 3DS. But if you want like the best quality way to play like whatever, all of these systems, I would say definitive DS would be the DSi XL and the DS Lite. You know, you can't get rid of this one, because quite frankly, this plays your GBA games, and you also have a fair amount of DS games that utilize the GBA slot, most notably the Guitar Hero games. Now, of course, these days, the Guitar Hero games are more of a novelty on the DS. You know, I don't really think there's much reason to play them these days. However, if you want to, you have to use an original DS or DS Lite. The DSi XL, though, I think this has everything you could possibly want out of, you know, an original DS system. Unfortunately, with the shutdown of like the DSi shop and all of that stuff, I don't really think there's as much of a reason to own this. You know, back when that shop was functional and everything, I think there was a lot more going for the DSi XL. But now I do feel like, you know, the DS Lite and DSi XL are kind of like equals in terms of like, oh, what's the definitive original DS model? Because back in the day, this you could at least say like, oh, well, you can download all these DSiWare games. You can't do that anymore. The DS Lite, man, you can still play your GBA games on this thing, so it's all good. But hey, what does my opinion matter? At the end of the day, pick which DS really suits you best. If you pick this one, I'm calling the cops.